Hi, everyone. Welcome to the 11th episode of the Svarim Chatter series in Shabtai Tzvi. On this episode of the series, I spoke with Professor Pawel Maciejko, and we discussed Jacob Frank and the Frankist movement. I also will mention that this came out since we recorded this episode. Just a brand new book was published called The Books of Jacob, which is a 990-page historical fiction novel based on Jacob Frank. I cannot attest to the book, how good it is or anything like that. I just do want to let the listeners know, if you find this topic interesting, that you can, do your own research on that book and check it out. I would like to thank once again the corporate sponsor of this series, Gluck Plumbing, for all your service needs, big or small, in New Jersey, with a full service division, from boiler changeouts, main sewer line snakeouts, cameraing main lines to a simple faucet leak. Gluck Plumbing Service Division has you covered. Give them a call, 732-523-1836. Extension 1, again, 732-523-1836, extension 1. And if anyone has any comments, questions, or feedback, or would like to sponsor an episode to support the show, please email me, svarimchatter@gmail.com. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the Svarim Chatter podcast, and another episode regarding the series on Shabtai Tzvi and the Sabbatianism in general. So on this episode of the podcast, I'll be talking with Professor Pawel Maciejko, who is the Associate Professor in History and the Leonard and Helen R. Stolman Chair in Classical Jewish Religion, Thought, and Culture at Johns Hopkins University. And we'll be talking about Jacob Frank and the Frankist and Frankism. And he has a book published on this called The Mixed Multitude, Jacob Frank and the Frankist Movement, 1755 to 1816, published by Penn University Press. So thank you, Professor Maciejko, for joining me once again.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Okay, so let's get right into Frank. So I mentioned in the title there the years, but I guess let's start off. I don't know if you think we should start off with Frank himself, or maybe start off where in Europe, especially Eastern Europe, the state of Sabbatianism at the time, and tell the listeners what time period we are talking about exactly.
Well, we are talking about the second half of the 18th century, right? So if we are trying to locate Frankism in the wider history of Sabbatianism, we are roughly 100 years after Shabtai Tzvi's conversion to Islam.
Now, we're told this is mainly happening in, where does this happen? Mainly in Poland, Ukraine? Where are we?
It's complicated. Frank himself is from Poland. He's born in Poland. He's an Ashkenazi Jew from Podolia, which is today's Ukraine, back then part of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. But very shortly after his birth, there is a wave of persecutions of the Sabbatian believers by the rabbinic establishment and his family, of which we don't know much, but we know for certain that the family is a Sabbatian family. So the family moves to the Ottoman Empire, and Frank grows up in the Ottoman Empire. There he marries, then he engaged in all kinds of trade. He's itinerant, he's traveling a lot through Turkey and the Balkans. And then in 1755, he returns to Poland as an emissary of Turkish Sabbatians to Polish Sabbatians, and then the movement takes off. And once it takes off, it develops initially in Poland, and then it spreads also onto Bohemia and Moravia, parts of Germany, parts of the Ottoman Empire proper too.
Two quick questions about him. First of all, do we know what exact year he was born? And second of all, why was he called Frank?
Yes, he was born. There are minor discrepancies in the sources about the exact year, right? But he was born around 1725-26. Then the reason why he was called Frank, this is actually quite interesting. He was. It's a nickname, right? It's a mekune. It's not his family name. But it's he acquired this name when he in Turkey. When he arrived from Poland as a Yiddish-speaking Ashkenazi Jew, and was identified as a Westerner, right, in a number of Oriental languages, Turkish included. The word Frank or Frank is a kind of a generic term for things and people coming from the West, right? So cannon is a Frankish weapon, syphilis is a Frankish disease, trousers, pants are a Frankish dress, and so on. And people who come from the West are Franks or Franks, and this is how he came to be called Frank, as an Ashkenazi among the Ladino-speaking Sephardim in the Ottoman Empire. Now, then, when he returned to Poland, this is when it becomes interesting. In some dialects of Yiddish, the term Frank or Frank has the same connotations that it has in modern Hebrew, right? Frankim are not Western people, are Oriental people among the Westerners. So when in Poland, Frank was called Frank or Frank, its association was not that he is a Westerner in the Orient, but he is an Oriental Jew in the West. So yes, and I think this is one of the most characteristic things about Frank. Wherever he goes, he's from elsewhere, right? He's the ultimate outsider.
Right. So now that we got some background information about him, I mean, let's tell listeners maybe familiar with him, maybe not. I mean, what's unique about him and what is this movement that followed him? So I guess what started in Turkey, I don't know how much I've talked, and then what took place when he went, when he went to Poland.
Well, at the beginning, it's one of the many subsects within the broader Sabbatian movements. There's nothing, and he returns to Poland. Essentially, he's an emissary. He's sent from Salonika. From the Turkish Sabbatians are sending him to his brethren in Poland, and he's having some following, but he's at that point he's just one of many minor Sabbatian leaders in this part of the world. What sets him apart is the Landskrona incident, right? It's an affair during which Frank and the group of his disciples are arrested, and everything that follows. So one of the arguments I am making in my book is that at some point it's no longer Sabbatianism. It has a Sabbatian genealogy. It grows out of the broader and wider Sabbatian movement, but at some point it's a history. It's a history in itself.
Okay, so I think before we get into the incident and then subsequently what happened, I mean, let's talk about, or maybe this goes together. I mean, at that point, what was his ideology? How did he differ from the standard of Sabbatianism at the time, or the Turkish, you mentioned the Dunme, right? What did they believe, and what did him and his followers, what did they end up believing, how it differed?
No, this is really about what they end. In other words, at that stage, we know nothing about their beliefs. All that we know about Frank has very well developed teachings, and we know an awful lot about these teachings because we happen to have a number of Frankist manuscripts. They are not physically written by frank, right? They are dictated to his disciples who write them down. But we know what Frank's teachings were. But all these teachings come from a later period, much longer, much after they eventually converted to Catholicism. At that stage, we don't really know anything, and all that we know is problematic in the sense that it was expressed for polemical purposes, right? There are two public disputations between Frank's disciples and Polish rabbis, and I'm sure we'll talk about it, right? There are motions for these disputations, but it's very hard to say whether these motions are the authentic Frankist doctrine, or it is something that is being said for the purpose of the disputation only.
Okay, so let's get more back. Then let's go into the incident in Landskronja. I'm sure I'm not pronouncing it right. Let's go into the incident. What happened? What exactly? Into more detail. What happened there, and then what was the result and the after effects of that incident?
Yes, so they're having a party. It's a group of Frank and again, the exact number it varies according to sources, but approximately 20 of his disciples. And what they did was they took a woman, according to some sources, a wife of the local rabbi. They undressed her naked. They put the crown from a Torah scroll on her head, and they were dancing around her, singing and kissing her naked breasts. This is more or less what happens, right? We have a number of sources telling different aspects of the story. Now, what happened afterwards is that some local Jews got upset and reported them to the local Polish authorities, basically asking the local secular Polish authorities, the governor of the town, to place them under arrest. The interesting question is why? Because the story seems shocking in itself, but once you get deeper into the sources about the Sabbatian movement at that time, I don't want to say it's widespread, but it's not unique. There are other stories about the Sabbatians engaging in all kinds of, let's call them orgiastic rituals. And in most cases, the Jewish authorities try to keep it quiet. It's not that they're happy about it, but for both religious and political reasons, they do not bring these kind of affairs to the attention of Christian authorities, and in this case they do. And the question is why? And again, the claim that I am making in the book is that it's not so much about the fact that they had an orgy, if you want to call it an orgy. It's about the fact that there is Christian symbolism involved in what they are doing, and what appears in the sources is that a part of the ritual that they are conducting is an imitation or a parody of the Christian Eucharist, and this is what the Jewish authorities find extremely dangerous, because they are afraid that if the Christians find out, the authorities will it will put all Jews in danger, not only the Frankists, and in order to preempt it, they basically report them to the authorities.
Now, after they report them to authorities, I mean, what was the result? What was the after effects of that?
So the after effect is there is a jurisdictional question, right? Whether if they committed a crime, what's the character of the crime, and what kind of court should deal with this case. In normal circumstances, matters pertaining to the Jews would be handled by a local secular court, and in this case, it goes to the ecclesiastical court. It goes to the court of the bishop in whose diocese this took place. And it is the Jewish authorities who approach the court, right? It's not the Frankists. Basically, the Jewish authorities are going to the bishop and saying, "We have a bunch of dangerous heretics on our hands. Why don't you guys do what you do to your heretics, namely burn them at the stake?" To which the Frankists, and this is where the real story begins, as a strategy of defense, to which the Frankists respond saying, "Oh, the rabbis are accusing us of all kinds of weird things, but the true reason why they consider us heretics and want to burn us at the stake is the proximity of our belief to Christianity." In other words, what they are saying is, we are a group within Judaism, right, that is hostile to the rabbinic authority and is in some areas closer to Christianity than other Jews. Now, they are not saying that they're Christians. They are not saying that they would want to become Christians. There's no discussion about conversion. They're saying there is a version of Judaism that is closer to Christianity than the mainstream rabbinic Judaism, and we would like to have a public disputation with the rabbis, in which we will be able to present the tenets of our belief versus the tenets of belief of rabbinic Jews.
Let me ask you two questions on the side before we get to the disputation and the allegations there. So first of all, I mean, you mentioned that the incident had like 20 followers of Frank. I mean, but then you mentioned that by the disputation there were followers. I mean, how do we know what numbers we're speaking with, like how many followers there are of Frank at this point?
No, at this point we don't. Essentially, we'll talk about it a little bit later, I assume, but the only moment in the history of the Frankist movement where I can have some sense of the numbers is when they convert to Catholicism, because there I really have baptismal records, so I know roughly how many people converted with Frank, and I know that there were more. In other words, I do have sources which tell me there were followers of Frank who did not convert. Right, so I have some sense of the numbers, and I know that we are talking about thousands of people, and not 20. Right, but at any other point of this story, I cannot really count Frankists. Like I simply don't know.
Okay, I mean, that also is the point I wanted to make, that there were thousands. There wasn't just a small, tiny group. And the other thing was, I mean, you mentioned the Rabbanim, the rabbinic leaders who got involved. So, I mean, we should mention some names of who those that got involved. I mean, first of all, this was like in 1756. Was this at the same time as the Yaakov Emden and Eibish's controversy going on?
Yes, that's correct.
Right, and now Yaakov Emden gets involved here, and there are others.
Yes.
The Vada Barotzis, Baruch Meretz Yovin. So I don't know if you want to speak about some of them, those who got involved and what they did.
Yes. So essentially, Emden is very important in the story. The Eibeshit's controversy is very much in the background, right? It's 1751-53 more or less, the peak of the controversy. So it's 2 years before Frank, and the most important rabbi in Poland involved in this controversy is Rabbi Chaim Cohen Rappaport, who is the chief rabbi of Lvov and Ruthenia, and who in the Eibeshit's controversy is very strongly anti-Eibeshit. The majority of it's a different subject, right? But for the majority of German rabbis are anti-Eibeshit. In Poland, he has very strong support. But Chaim Cohen Rappaport is one of the few who is against. So, and from the very beginning, and then he is of course against the Baal Shem Tov, which is yet another aspect of the story, and he is the chief disputant during the disputation, and he is basically leading the anti-Frankist campaign of the Polish rabbi. But Emden from the outset is involved and is the chief strategist, right? It's the mind behind the anti-heretical policy of the Polish rabbinate at that point. And many of the Jewish sources that we have on Frank, we got through Emden. In other words, it is not necessarily Emden's own writings, right? But these are letters that he received, that he published, that he preserved, and
I mentioned before. I just want you maybe to clarify for the listeners. The Vadar Abarotzes, and maybe people don't know who they were, and the Baruch Eretz Yavan. Those are two of the big important aspects. So who they were and what their involvement was here.
Well, the Council of Four Lands, right? The Vadar Barzot is the chief organ of Jewish autonomy in Poland, Lithuania. It is again, it would require another long conversation, right? But it was established in order to collect the poll tax. It's a part of the fiscal system of the country, and all minorities such as Jews, Armenians, Scots, whoever else lives in Poland have their own councils for dealing with their own affairs, and the state authorities recognize the Council of Four Lands as the supreme authority over all Jews in Poland. It's not a rabbinic council; it's a secular institution. But parallel to the meetings of the elders of the Vad, you also have a rabbinic court, and it normally arbitrates in all kinds of disputes between Jewish communities, and in some cases individuals and communities. And of course, from the outset, the council is involved in the Frankist affair, and Baruch Eretz Yavan is the Stadlan, right? So intercessor or lobbyist, if you will. One interesting thing about the Jews in Poland at that time, that they are one of the first groups to have professional diplomats. It's his job to lobby on behalf of the Jewish community. This is his profession. And indeed, from some point onwards, he's very much involved in this controversy, as he was in the Eibeshit's controversy. Right? It's again anti-Eibeshit.
Okay, so now we'll get back to Frank and the disputations. I mean, what were there before get to the disputations? I guess plural. What were their accusations mainly, and especially against the Talmud, against the Gemara, and the blood libel? I mean, what were the accusations?
Okay, so there are two disputations, and they should be treated separately because they're slightly different. So the first disputation is in Kamieniec-Podolski in 1757. This is in the wake of the arrest in Lanskoronie, what we discussed, and at that point, what the Frankists are trying to achieve is an official recognition of their version of Judaism as a legitimate form of Judaism. And the important things here is that from the perspective of the Polish-Lithuanian state of that time, there are already two versions of Judaism. In other words, Poland, Lithuania is the only place in the world back then which basically recognizes that the rabbinic Judaism is not the only form of Judaism. And the precedents are the Karaites, right? Are the Karaites communities in Troki and in Halic. Now, from the perspective of the Polish Lithuanian state, the Karaites are a group of non-rabbinic Jews, non-Talmudic Jews, and theoretically, any Jew in Poland, every Jew in Poland can decide whether he or she wants to be a rabbinic Jew or a non-rabbinic Jew, right? This doesn't really happen. But the legal system allows for something like this, and there are cases, very rare cases, of intermarriages between Rabbinites and Karaites, and of people switching communities. But basically, the situation is that the legal system, just like today, an American Jew can decide whether he or she wants to be an Orthodox Jew or conservative Jew or Reformed Jew or an atheistic Jew. In the 1750s Poland, Lithuania, a Jew can decide whether he wants to be a Rabbinate or Karaite. Now, if there are two Judaisms, there's no reason why there shouldn't be three. And essentially, what the Frankists are trying to achieve is to get a recognition from the state and the church of their form of Judaism as one of the legitimate form of Judaism. This is the aim of the disputation. And for this purpose, they essentially argue a few things. First of all, they argue that, like the Karaites, they're not saying that we are the Karaites, right? But they're saying, like the Karaites, we are practitioners of a form of Judaism that rejects the Talmud. This is not a part of our religion. And then they go further. This is the point of the real or alleged connection to Christianity, because essentially they say, like the Christians, we believe that the Messiah has already come. Now, they don't say who this Messiah is, right? They don't say we believe in Jesus. But for the Christians, it sounds great, right? We have Messianic Jews. Then they say, we believe in the Trinity. Now, again, they don't really say the Trinity, right? We believe on the basis of the Zohar, on the basis of our study of Kabbalah, we believe that there is some kind of triune form within the Godhead, right? In this sense, we are closer to the Christians than mainstream Jews. We believe in the incarnation. We believe that it's possible for God to become human, or God to take human form. Again, it's another point of comparison with Christianity. On the other hand, we reject the return to the land of Israel. No, the temple will not be rebuilt. No kibbutz galuyot. Redemption is going to happen in the diaspora. The land of Israel is now not relevant. So this is more or less. These are more or less the points for the disputations. Now, and mind you, this is not a Jewish-Christian disputation, right? These are two groups of Jews who are before a Christian arbiter arguing which version of Judaism is correct, and whether this quote unquote unorthodox form of Judaism should be recognized by the state and the church authorities.
Okay, so this disputation, I mean, what's the result of this one before we get to the next one?
Well, the result of the disputation is that they win, of course. Namely, the bishop who is presiding over the disputation says, "Okay, we recognize that their form of Judaism is accepted, and from this moment onward, each and every Jew in Poland, Lithuania, has a choice whether they want to be." He doesn't use the word Orthodox, right? Because there's no term back then. But whether he wants to believe to the Talmudic Judaism, Karaite Judaism, or Sabbatian Judaism, which again doesn't call Sabbatian. Now, unfortunately for the Frankists, and fortunately for other Polish Jews, very shortly after the disputation, the bishop suddenly dies, and the ruling is never implemented. So it is. I saw the ruling. I am quoting it in my book, but it's never enforced. And at that point, you really have real persecution of the Frankists. Like real means physical violence. People are getting killed. There are clashes between the Frankists and their opponents, and Frank and his followers escape to the Ottoman Empire, where in order to flee the persecution, they convert to Islam. This is so ostensibly at that point, the story is over.
And obviously, clearly, it's not. So what happens in Lvov in 1759? We end up with another disputation about a blood libel, and Reb Chaim Cohen Rappaport, like you mentioned, he's the chief rabbi by the disputation, and then so what happens there?
So what happens there is that there is a bishop, another bishop, by the name of Sautek, who is involved in at that point you have a roughly at that point, right? This decade, you have a wave of blood libel accusations in Poland. Basically, the blood libels are in Eastern Europe. They're delayed, like they don't exist during the time they are very widespread in Western Europe, but they start to appear during the period when everyone in the West thinks that they are the thing of the past, and you have a wave of ritual murder accusation, and one of very prominent Polish bishop is involved in two such accusations, and his problem is that nobody believes him. Everyone knows that the bishop is basically pushing forward these accusations because the Jews owe him some money and he's addicted to gambling, and not the Jews owe him, that he owes some money to the Jews, and he's in financial trouble and is basically doctoring these accusations in order to extract money from the Jews. And what he needs is an internal confirmation that the blood accusation is in fact true. So he cuts the deal with Frank in exchange for supporting Frank against the rabbinic establishment. He wants the Frankists to testify that the blood libel is in fact true, and for this reason, he wants to stage another disputation, Lvov 1759. Again, some of the motions are repetitions of the motions from the first one, from Kamenets, but the most important accusation is the ritual murder accusation, and it's important to emphasize that that it's a general point. In other words, the accusation is not that some Jews at some location killed a Christian baby. The accusation is that human sacrifice is a tenet of Judaism, right? So that on the basis of analysis of the Talmud and rabbinic sources, you can show that the Jews are under a religious obligation to kill Christian babies, right? It's not only about the fact that some people allegedly did it; it's about the claim that all Jews are supposed to do it. And what the Frankists are doing are arguing on the basis of the Gemara and Shulchan Aruch and other sources that is actually there.
Now, the result of this disputation is, or what happens after, I'll let you talk about this, is that the Franks all convert to Christianity, even though, notwithstanding, we should mention they had converted to Islam, and then Frank was in Turkey, and then they ended up back in Poland, clearly, at this time. So, I mean, how did this result come about?
Yes, so the result of the disputation, just to say it, right? The church decides that it doesn't want to. The church, as such, right? The church authorities, as opposed to one local bishop, decides that they do not want to. For various reasons that I'm trying to outline in my book, they don't want to pursue this accusation. So the decision after the disputation is no decision. The Frankists are not declared winners, and the church says there are people who say this, there are people who say that. We don't know. Now, already before the disputation, it is clear that if the Frankists are decided to go with the blood libel, they cannot stay within Judaism, right? It's no longer an option. And then you have a very strong push from the rabbinic authorities, and again, Baruch Me'eretz Yavan, whom you mentioned, is one of the key figures in that. Basically, after all the story, the rabbinic authorities do everything in their power to push the Frankists to convert, to remove them from Judaism through forcing them to convert to Christianity, which again historically is a very, very unusual move. The conversion to Christianity, Shmad, is the ultimate taboo. It's something that it's in some sense it's worse than death, and there are, in normal circumstances, Jewish authorities are trying to keep even well-known heretics within the Jewish fold. The cases in which Jewish authorities are collaborating with Christian authorities in order to have a large group of Jews convert to Christianity are extremely unusual, and this is essentially what happens with the Frankists. They're both the church and the rabbis are pushing them out, and indeed they you have a mass conversion, right? More or less 3,000 adults convert in Lvov at that time.
I mean, like you mentioned, this is the 1750s and 3,000 Jewish adults, and converting there obviously there were more, as is a large number. I mean, something else you mentioned that interestingly, that usually it almost never happens, that the rabbis were happy about this. I mean, were they all happy? Was everybody advocating this? Or you mentioned there was maybe one that there was some that weren't.
Yeah, there is a story about the best. There is a story about the Baal Shem Tov that there is first of all, there is a story that the best participated in the disputation on the side of the rabbis. The story is not true, but there is a later Hasidic story that the best was involved on the rabbinic side. But what is true is that we have a statement in Shifchei Best where the Best is very upset about the conversion of the Frankists, and is characteristically is blaming it on rabbis. Right? He's saying that the Frankists converted because the rabbis spread lies about them, and yes, he is very upset according to Shifchei Best. But this is the really only exception on the Jewish side.
I just wanted something that you mentioned. Okay, so obviously, I'll already say now for the listeners that there'll be a link to the shows in the show's notes for the book, and obviously we're going through this. I mean, very quickly and very basic. There's a lot of detail in the book and a lot more of what we discussed. I mean, so what happens to the movement and to Frank after this conversion? Like you alluded to much earlier, not everybody converts. I mean, and then what happens to actually those who converted and to Frank himself?
So there is a brief but very interesting stage when they, just like what they wanted at the beginning, right, during the Kamenian disputation, was some kind of autonomy within Judaism, right? It's saying we are a Jewish group, but we want to be independent from mainstream Judaism and its institutions. So they are trying to obtain some kind of autonomy in Christianity. They are saying, okay, we are converting, we are becoming Christians, but we do not want to become regular Christians. We want to continue to circumcise our sons. We want to have our own cemeteries. We want to marry only among themselves, and we do not like marriages with Christians who are not of Jewish origin. We want to continue to pray in Hebrew. We want to continue to study the Zohar. We want to, right? So they are trying to negotiate for some kind of autonomy within Christianity. But these negotiations are unsuccessful. They are officially forced to become regular Christians, no conditions at all. And Frank, very shortly afterwards, get arrested as a Christian heretic. This time, not a Jewish heretic, which again I read as an attempt from the side of the church authorities to basically isolate him and his followers. Frank goes to prison, and the followers are forced to integrate into the wider Polish society. This is at least the expectation, right? Many of them are ennobled. There is again a legal mechanism for ennobling converting Jews that exists in Poland at the time. So more prominent Frankists are ennobled, but the expectation from the authorities is that they will simply disappear as a group, right? That they will integrate in the general Polish society, and Frank goes to prison.
Right. Now, just to tie up for Frank himself, I mean, eventually in the year when he goes to prison, then he after a while, he gets out of prison, right? I forget how many years exactly it is. And then, what happens? Where does he die? And when does he die? What's the end of his story?
So he goes to prison. He sits in a prison for 13 years. And it's a very special prison because it's a prison monastery, or prison that is in a monastery, which is the center of the Virgin Mary cult in Poland, and which is where he develops his teachings. Among other things, what he claims is that the Shekhinah, the divine presence, is imprisoned herself in one particular portrait of the Virgin Mary in this monastery, and he's developing the doctrine of female Messiah, and all kinds of things are happening there. So just actually for Frankist doctrines, this is a very important period, because this is exactly where it gets developed. So he sits in the monastery for 13 years. Then during the first partition of Poland, he's freed by the Russian troops. He moves to the Habsburg Empire. He lives in Moravia, but is frequenting the Vienna quite often. He's another 13 years there, and then he dies in Offenbach, which is today is a suburb of Frankfurt am Main, in Germany. And throughout this period, he's in touch with his followers. So even in prison, he's sending emissaries, receiving letters, sending letters, and the group continues to exist. Partly within the framework of official Catholicism, the people who converted, and partly within the framework of official Judaism. The followers of Frank who did not convert, especially his later followers from Bohemian Moravia, right? These people never converted, and they are in contact with Frank while he's in prison, and later when he's freed, and some kind of movement exists around him till, again, we don't know exactly till when, but well into the 19th century.
Right. Quickly, as we wrap up over here, I want to mention, you mentioned Bohemia, Moravia. I mean, in Prague, obviously, we know a little bit from Ned Behuder, Breskalando, in his writings, I believe, and then his Talmud, Blazer Fleckless, wrote a whole work about this called Havas David, that was redone in Hebrew. And I believe in your we'll talk about in your book, the book you edited, Sabbatian Heresy. There's translation into English of that as well. So I mean, what was the situation in Prague and in Bohemian Moravia? Obviously, well after his death, there obviously was still.
Yeah, no, this is very different Frankism than right, because in Prague you have a large number of people who are belonging to the secular Jewish elite of the city, are either Frankists or somehow connected to Frankism, right? So they are sending their kids to Frank's court, first in Brno and then in Offenbach. They are studying Frankist manuscripts. They are they're worshiping his daughter, who is the female messiah of the Frankists. And again, American example is Great Justice Louis Brandeis, of course, who was from a Frankist family. From a Frankist family in Prague, and who was very proud of his Frankist heritage. It's an open question how much he knew about the story that I just told. But for him, Frankism was a prime vehicle for Jewish emancipation and secularization in this part of the world.
Okay, so obviously, we in the limited time we did not get to. There's a lot more of the theology in Frank. So first of all, I'll include a link to your book. I mean, another reading I mentioned in Hebrew, the Ahavas David is printed together with the Oilot Chedesheni. There's a new edition of that, and there's your Sabbatean Heresy. And I think Frank's works. So his Words of the Lord. There is an English translation of that, right? There are other works as well. I mean that you.
But this is the most important one, and yes, there is an unpublished translation that is freely available on the internet. There is an unpublished Hebrew translation which is also available on the internet. The Hebrew is partial; it's not everything, but the English is everything. And there is a number of Hebrew Frankist texts that were published by scholars, mainly by Gershom Scholem. These are texts from Prague. Some of them are in Hebrew, some of them are in heavily Germanized Yiddish. Let's call it like this. So it's something on the border between Yiddish and German in Hebrew characters, but yeah, a lot of stuff is available out there.
Okay, so what's available, I'll include in the link in the show's notes. I mean, one more. There's a work I think you made extensive use of, right? If you're wrong, the Divrei Bina, right, of Ber of
Bolechov.
Is that, I saw that, was that available? There was a new Hebrew edition done of that.
I think. To my knowledge, it hasn't appeared yet, but there is someone, Professor Gershon Hundert from McGill, is working on a critical edition of Divrei Bina, and it's a manuscript of a Jewish trader from Brody, who was a translator of the rabbis during the disputations. He wasn't a disputant himself. He was providing simultaneous interpretation from Yiddish Polish, and he wrote a book. A large part of it, and manuscript, is an account of the early stage of Frankism, but which also has a lot of stuff on the rise of Hasidism in Poland. And yes, there is a critical edition in preparation that should appear sometime soon.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you very much for joining me again. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.